The latest testing results are in, and Ferrari is turning heads with a blazing performance that's caught everyone off guard. If we go by these test numbers, they might even be giving Red Bull a run for their money. But as the saying goes, the real game is in the qualification and the race, the moments we are all eagerly counting down to. Are these simulation results the real deal? And if so, what's the secret sauce behind Ferrari's sudden surge? Let's take a look. On the second day of Formula 1 2024 pre-season testing in Bahrain, we got more detailed information than the first day. Carlos Sainz's Ferrari topped the timesheets, but let's dig deeper into what happened. Reigning champion Max Verstappen didn't get a chance to drive the Red Bull on this day. His planned afternoon session was cancelled, giving Sergio Perez more time in the cockpit. Perez had lost running time in the morning due to a red flag, and the team wanted to make up for it. When comparing the pace of different teams, it's important to consider certain assumptions. In this case, we're assuming that Red Bull and Ferrari used the same base weight for their low fuel laps. However, it's worth noting that this assumption may not be accurate. Looking at recent history, it seems that Red Bull and Ferrari typically use a similar amount of fuel during testing. We gather this information by comparing how they perform in the opening races to their calculated pre-season testing performance. Last year in Bahrain qualifying, the gap between the fastest cars from these two teams closely resembled what we saw during testing. Over the past couple of seasons, a trend emerged. Mercedes and McLaren tend to run slightly heavier with their base weights in testing, while Aston Martin opts for a slightly lighter approach. This might not be the case this year, but it's our best reference point. Additionally, there were diverse testing programs, but both Red Bull and Ferrari tried some form of a race simulation run, providing us more insights into their potential performance. Let's focus on how fast the new Ferrari is for a single lap. Everything we've seen so far indicates that it's quick, much like last year's car that grabbed 6 poles during Red Bull's dominant season. Carlos Sainz shares that while the new car is a bit tricky to handle around the track when pushed, it's less affected by the strong winds here. According to Sainz, it feels more stable in windy conditions. Watching from the sidelines, Alex Albon noticed that the top teams like Ferrari can seemingly handle the wind better compared to his Williams. This ability is linked to how sensitive the cars are to changes in wind direction, known as yaw. Ferrari's technical director, Enrique Cardile, confirmed that improving this sensitivity was a significant focus in developing the SF24. When evaluating the single lap pace, we also need to consider the differences in tyre compounds used. Sainz set the fastest time using the soft C4 tyre, which won't be used in the race weekend. In contrast, Red Bull, Mercedes and McLaren stuck with the C3, the designated soft tyre for the race. Let's break down how much faster the soft C4 tyre is compared to the C3. When Carlos Sainz switched, he gained around 0.7 seconds, and Daniel Ricciardo later in the day found about 0.6 seconds with the same switch. Using the 0.6 second tyre boost as a reference, if we normalize Sainz's best lap to match the tyre equivalence of the second fastest Sergio Perez, Ferrari would still be slightly ahead, roughly by 0.1 seconds. However, this comparison is against Perez, not Verstappen. Last year, Verstappen outpaced Perez by around 0.15 seconds in Bahrain qualifying, but over the season, Verstappen's advantage was around 0.3 seconds. Factoring in a theoretical Verstappen pace advantage over Perez, it would put Red Bull just ahead by a narrow margin of half a tenth to a quarter of a second. On the other hand, we could also consider an adjustment for Ferrari, as Charles Leclerc was, on average, 0.18 seconds faster than Sainz last year. In summary, the one-lap pace seems very close. However, this analysis assumes that Red Bull wasn't concealing its true pace by running with more weight or using a less aggressive engine mode. In the afternoon, Lewis Hamilton showed improvement with the Mercedes, tackling an initially challenging balance and making it much more manageable. However, even with his progress, his best low-fuel lap was about 0.5 seconds slower than Sainz's, factoring in the 0.6 second tyre difference. Lando Norris in the McLaren was a bit behind the Mercedes, another 0.2 seconds off, but it's worth noting that both Mercedes and McLaren typically run slightly heavier during testing compared to Red Bull and Ferrari. Daniel Ricciardo's Red Bull performed well, securing the best time after the top teams. Even with the C4 tyre boost, when we account for the 0.6 second offset, his time is roughly on par with Lance Stroll's Aston Martin. Even considering a potential adjustment for Fernando Alonso's performance in the Aston, it's still about 0.5 seconds behind McLaren. Alpine is making strides with a significantly different car from last year, showing traits that are visibly improving. Their performance run for run seems to be within about 0.1 seconds of Red Bull and Aston Martin. Following them, Sauber, Williams and Haas rounded out the order in that sequence. And now for the unexpected twist in the story. Forget about the quick single laps. The initial long runs reveal a different tale. Both Red Bull and Ferrari embarked on race simulation runs simultaneously, using the same combination of C3, C2 and C1 tyres for their respective stints. Surprisingly, the Ferrari appears exceptionally strong in this comparison, suggesting that if it were a race, Carlos Sainz would have beaten Sergio Perez by a staggering full minute over the 57-lap distance. Let's break down the 3 stints. Stint 1, Sainz C3, average 1 minute 38.21 seconds, 15 laps. Perez C3, average 1 minute 38.65 seconds, 13 laps. Stint 2, Sainz C2, average 1 minute 37.30 seconds, 17 laps. Perez C2, average 1 minute 37.46 seconds, 18 laps. Stint 3, Sainz C1, average 1 minute 35.38 seconds, 17 laps. Perez C1, average 1 minute 37.13 seconds, 21 laps. In this comparison, Red Bull ran a total of 52 laps, while Ferrari completed only 49. When we calculate the average lap time for each team's race simulations and multiply it by the race's 57 laps, Sainz seemingly wins this race by a whopping 60 seconds, averaging over 1 second per lap faster. Even after making an adjustment for any potential extra weight due to Red Bull's additional 3 laps, it doesn't add up to anything close to 1 second per lap. This conflicting evidence doesn't align with the marginal advantage Ferrari had in single-lap pace. It's hard to believe that this accurately represents Red Bull's true pace. However, these are the numbers from day 2. We'll have to wait for day 3 to confirm or challenge this surprising revelation. McLaren didn't really do a low-fuel run under the lights, but I have a hunch that if Lando had done one, he might have been ahead of Lewis. The MCL38 looks pretty good to me. Not Red Bull or Ferrari level, but still solid. I'm sticking to my belief that Red Bull has more to show. The vibe in the garage, especially with Max's crew, suggests there's untapped potential in that car. And remember, Perez was behind the wheel, and he's not known for stellar qualifying performances. Using average lap time as a metric from a test session can be tricky. Drivers don't maintain a consistent pace throughout, and slow laps can skew the numbers. Plus, there's the whole tire usage factor, making things even more complicated. Now, about the assumption that Red Bull wasn't showing its true pace, well, couldn't Ferrari be doing the same? Past performances don't always predict the future, and Fred Vasseur seems to be playing the strategic game, as well as Christian Horner. It's a chess match out there. As for the doubt about Red Bull pacing themselves because they ran the C4 and Ferrari didn't, well, it's a guess. A pretty good one, maybe, but still a guess. Tire choice is like an independent variable, just like fuel load and engine settings. Gary noticed that Red Bull drivers aren't pushing as hard as others, and Max faced some trouble in his first runs on the C1, but they brushed it off as a dirty track, and he was blazing fast on the C3 later. Some might say being only 0.4 seconds ahead of a Red Bull with 2 grades harder rubber isn't a great start. Leclerc's time on C5 was just about 0.1 seconds faster than his time on C4, but that doesn't show the whole picture. Here's the deal. Max and Leclerc didn't bother going for quick laps in the last few hours, and both times were rather slow. RBR is probably still faster, but you can't jump to conclusions just by looking at these lap times. They both seem to be playing their cards close to the chest. Sainz hitting 1.29xx yesterday indicates that Leclerc has more speed left, and Max likely has hidden seconds as well. Leclerc was 0.3 faster on C3 than Max. The thing is, C4 and C5 tyres don't perform well in Bahrain. So in a nutshell, the story isn't complete, and there's more to come from both Leclerc and Max. They're keeping aces up their sleeves, and Bahrain might not fully reveal their true speed.